We can't beat them in a straight fight. We can't beat them in a straight fight.
Madness and stupidity.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. For seasons, we watched as the danger from the White Walkers and later the Night King escalated and became an existential threat. They not only had the same power as the forces aligned against our heroes in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but they had the same sense of invincibility as Thanos against the Avengers in Infinity War, along with a bit of mystique thrown in as well. The eventual clash between the forces of the living and the dead was one of the most anticipated confrontations in television and even cinematic history, but it ended up being a complete failure on every level. And no, it's not because we didn't get the result that we wanted. As Game of Thrones fans, we were used to that sort of thing. It's because not only wasn't it faithful to the character arcs and the world George R. R. Martin built, but the battle plan devised for this episode was nonsensical. And you don't even have to be a military expert to recognize how foolish their strategy was for the defense of Winterfell. For this video, I forced myself to rewatch the Long Night episode. Well, I did fast forward through most of the crypt scenes because they were largely irrelevant for what I'm doing here. But my main focus is the approach they took in the battle. But I'm also going to address some plot points and other ridiculous things because they're all too glaring not to mention. So let's dive in. They decide they're going to face their numerically superior foe out in the open, rather than in the walled castle that's behind them. This problem is compounded since it's dark and they can only see a short distance in front of them. Nevertheless, if you do engage the enemy here, you need to have a plan in place for an orderly protected retreat inside and ensure there is adequate support from the castle walls. We'll get back to that. We hear the dragons roar as Jon and Dany fly off to a higher elevation so they can watch the field. I have to say that hearing Drogon and Rhaegal in this episode gave me a pang of remorse because it reminded me how much better House of the Dragon has done with their dragons, and well, it brought home all the missed opportunities with Game of Thrones. We see Ghost standing next to Jorah. Why is Jon's direwolf with Jorah? Can someone explain that? Since he can't accompany Jon, why isn't he in the castle where he could protect Sansa or even Bran? What the hell is going on here? Everything is so damn dark. Melisandre then bizarrely emerges from this blackness before the army. Where's she coming from? At least, though, she's going to enable us to see things a little bit better by igniting the Dothraki's Araks. Maybe someone should have thought about lighting the trench to protect the army and the castle. Someone? But no, we get flaming Araks. Dan and Dave have a thing for flaming swords. It must have made their week when they wrote this. These geniuses also placed the trebuchets in front of the army. Since this is the artillery, it needs to be behind the lines, or even better, inside the castle. There you can continue firing even when the army is engaged. Militarily, this is as basic as tying your shoes before you go out. In a battle as this, the Dothraki serve as the cavalry for the army. That means they should be placed on the flanks because they're mobile. Here they can guard against attacks from the side or deliver a blow to the flank of the enemy if the moment's right. Here, though, they're in the worst spot possible, the middle, preparing to make a frontal assault on an enemy that outnumbers them, and in the dark, no less. It's a pointless suicide charge that anyone with a shred of sense could predict will fail. And Ghost is taking part in the death charge too? You gotta be kidding me. We saw what a handful of whites did to Bran's direwolf Summer. We get the intended visual of the lighted swords being snuffed out meaninglessly. This spurs Dany to want to jump into the action, which makes sense. Jon, whose character has been on autopilot with limited dialogue choices, says,
The Night King is coming.
Yeah, Jon, just sit on the hill and watch the entire army die, instead of burning the whites. And how does he know that the Night King might not just sit this one out? Smartly, Dany doesn't listen to the AI version of Jon, and we're then treated to some great visuals even if it's all hollow. Still, no one has lit the trenches. No rush, only civilization hangs in the balance. They'll get around to it eventually. Oh, and previously they were conserving ammo from their idiotically positioned trebuchets. Those things should have been firing constantly. Now, of course, because they were on the front lines, they're overrun. All of our non-fighters found a safe place to wait out the battle.
We're in a crypt. Nobody thought of that. He's bringing all the dead people back to life, and they've put the women and children in a crypt with all the dead people.
We get a horde of whites slamming into the army. A wave of this magnitude should wipe everyone out. The trench is still not lit, and while it's too dark to see, it appears as if everyone is out of formation, which means that they should be overwhelmed here by the whites, who then would fill in the gaps and surround them. Sam has suddenly become fearful again, another destroyed character arc at the hands of Benioff and Weiss. Cue the retreat, which, like everything else, wasn't planned well. Now they finally decided it'd be a good time to light the trenches. Davos waves futilely to the sky with torches. For some reason, Dany and Jon are up in the clouds. They should be burning whites nonstop, but this is the second time they've done this. It's either because they're on break or they're foolishly looking for the Night King. The Unsullied get into formation to protect the retreat. We see now how well a good formation serves them in defense. Too bad it couldn't have been employed earlier. Melisandre emerges for more fire tricks. She slowly walks to the trench while people are dying around her. This time, though, it's more difficult for her to get the spark, like she did for the Dothraki suicide charge. But for contrived, dramatic purposes, she struggles, and then suddenly it ignites. More nice visuals. And we can see things for a bit, too. Next, we have an insulting and inexcusable sequence where Davos is watching the whites sacrificing themselves so that they can pass through the trench. When it's breached, he tells everyone to man the walls. The walls should have already been manned. What are they waiting for? This is a fight for survival, but everyone is off on a Starbucks break? The whites start climbing the walls. The defenders don't have any hot pitch to burn them with and stem the advance. They're just standing up there waiting for the whites to climb over. To make this cluster even worse, they're still arranging their defenses on the wall while the assault is in full swing. This is just inexcusable. They should have had a line of archers on the wall from the start of this ill-conceived confrontation, raining flaming arrows down on the dead before they even hit the lines. We have Arya jumping around like a combination of Black Widow and Spider-Man with extravagantly dramatic music added in. Almost everything they do with her in this episode is over the top. She is slicing and dicing everyone fearlessly. And fearless is the key here because it has a bearing in a bit. Lyanna Mormont's death is hilarious. She's mangled by a giant, and then hobbled, she charges at it, screaming. It picks her up and then, for some reason, puts her close to its face so Lyanna can stab it in the eye. Sure, a lifeless, reanimated giant would do this rather than crushing her once and for all. We get excellent visuals of Jon and Dany up in the clouds, with the moon now. Instead of having them below, saving their army by burning more of the dead, they're looking for the Night King because his RSVP said he'd be attending. All of this does look great because of the fine cinematography. It's too bad that all of their work went to waste for this shallow wreckage of brain-dead writing.
I think you've got to start wondering, what the hell is this plot?
Remember how fearless Arya just was? Beric had even used her as an example to help rally the Hound.
I can't beat death. Tell her that.
Well, now, a short time later, Arya's inexplicably scared. This is a flip that makes the character reversals on the latter seasons of The Walking Dead look well done. The Hound is ready for action now, though, and he and Beric rescue the now vulnerable Arya. Beric dies ridiculously. We get a dragon fight in the sky. The Night King is finally coming, and it's Rhaegal versus Viserion. Maybe this would have been good if we could have seen it better, but we can't really figure out who is hitting whom. But then the Night King takes this ridiculous fall. Rhaegal decides to exit the fight for reasons. He throws Jon off, fortunately closer to the ground than the Night King was dismounted. Of course, the Night King survived the fall. Dany tries to Dracarys him. And in an episode full of cringe, we get one of the worst moments where the previously emotionless Night King smirks at Dany after her attempt fails.
Why?
One of the more painful scenes is how they tease the long-awaited sword battle between Jon and the Night King by having Jon pursue him across the field. But no, even though this has been building up for years, we don't get it. Instead, the Night King raises the dead, a number that should easily kill Jon, but they cut away. This is just one of a series of moments where the characters are surrounded by insurmountable numbers of the dead. They should die, but the show conveniently cuts away. When we see them again, they're miraculously alive, but we don't see how they got out of it. This cycle just keeps repeating itself as the last vestiges of credibility drains from the show. Meanwhile, the crypts have come alive with the dead. Who would have expected that? Drogon manages to save Jon by burning all the whites around him, but somehow Jon emerges unscathed. Instead of flying him to the Godswood, Jon and Dany decide it's a better idea for him to go on foot.
Madness. Madness and stupidity.
As Jon continues his fruitless quest, Dany just sits in shock, staring at the dead around her. Maybe she hears bells. This gives the whites the opportunity to hijack Drogon. Dany falls off and he abandons her there, only to have Jorah, who was wandering the empty battlefield for some reason, save her. Sam is covered in whites. He'll surely die here. Viserion suddenly just falls from the sky onto the buildings, which leads to a bizarre standoff with Jon. The best part is where Jon safely hides behind a pile of rubble. This is the same Viserion who just blew a huge hole through the wall at Winterfell. Jon employs his secret weapon, screaming at Viserion. Dany shouldn't survive here, surrounded by whites. The least they could have done is have Drogon return to help save her. Jorah dies, though, even though his plate armor has suddenly become ineffective. Remember back when there was competent writing, what plate armor did? More characters face certain death. Some should have died multiple times in this convoluted calamity. Like Dany, they also just stare as the dead are reanimated around them, as if they didn't know this was a thing. What part of the army of the dead don't they understand? Then we have Bran chilling in the Godswood. He never used his power at all to save lives, maybe warg Viserion? No, he just continues to be a creeper. Why is anyone protecting this guy? This all leads to the scene that haunts the nightmares of Game of Thrones fans. It's the moment that destroyed the mystique and aura surrounding the Night King and the White Walkers, and seasons of plot development with it. The score as the Night King approached Bran was excellent. Like the CGI, it was wasted. But it left me thinking on second viewing, after witnessing the nonsensical battle plan again, and all the idiocy, that the only real ending here is for the Night King to kill Bran. Instead, we got the Deus Ex Machina aria. Sure, it would have been dark, but so was Ned's death, and the Red Wedding. This would have been a result more fitting for Martin's world than the garbage that we got. Instead, after the Long Night episode, we were faced with the realization that Game of Thrones would end as poorly as this laughably bad battle that Dan and Dave concocted. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button. For more on A Song of Ice and Fire and House of the Dragon, listen to Caraxes and subscribe. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you soon.